Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the relationship between arousal, which in psychology we mean how alert, how optimally you're functioning, and then performance. The Yerkes-Dodson Law, which is very old, Yerkes is from like the middle of the last century, but they found that too much arousal can actually interfere with performance. Prior to this law being established, researchers were going back and forth. You know, is it good for us to be aroused, and that might help keep us focused, or that might give us the energy that we need to perform well? Others said, well, if you get too aroused, then it can actually distract from the task that you're trying to do. Well, what Yerkes and Dodson were able to show is that it really depends on what kind of task you're doing. If you're doing a difficult task, then your performance is best under low arousal conditions and drops off as arousal levels get higher. And the reverse is true for easy tasks. If you have low levels of arousal, then you won't perform as well on an easy task, whereas higher levels of arousal are beneficial. Finding that really it's the task that matters helped to sort out this argument that researchers had been having, because they hadn't necessarily all been testing the same kind of task when they were assessing the role of arousal. So if you think about taking an exam, which is probably in most classes going to be a fairly difficult task, requiring you to retrieve things from memory and maybe write answers on the fly, or pick among a list of viable options, right, that all look like they could possibly be the answer. When you're taking an exam, it's probably best to be at a moderate level of arousal. You don't want to be too aroused, because that'll make it that might undermine your performance on those items that are particularly difficult. You don't want to be under-aroused, because then that might cause you to not do well on the easy tasks. Some of the questions on any test are going to be easy, and sometimes you goof it up. I was just making a key for an exam today for one of my in-person classes, and for me, filling out the key, I take the test while the students are taking the test, just to make sure that all the items read the same way in context as they read when I was making the test. And one of the answers, it was so easy that I obviously knew which one it was and marked it. And then it wasn't until later on when I looked back, I was like, oh my gosh, I put the opposite of the right answer, because I was so under aroused. I was like, know it, moving on, and actually marked it wrong. Too little arousal might cause you to make those kinds of, sort of errors of not paying attention, whereas too much arousal can be what we call test anxiety, where you actually end up performing more poorly. So you want to be at the proper level of arousal, which is always an interesting trick. Speaking of, sorry, back to this slide. Speaking of test anxiety, it's a difficult job to get yourself to the right level of arousal for any particular circumstance. One of the things that we can do when we have test anxiety is to sort of, prior to exams, practice working our way through and lowering our level of arousal when confronted with something that looks like a test. If you're interested, if you have test anxiety, I actually have some materials that I can provide to you that are sort of desensitization exercises that can help you to be a little less anxious when confronted with a test. It's funny, because I think a lot of students who have test anxiety think that if they take an online test, an online class, then they won't have test anxiety, because you're not sitting in a room with a bunch of other people that might increase your arousal and make you anxious. The problem is that in most online classes, there's a time limit on the test that looms, and the way that Canvas presents it, it's got like a countdown clock up there in the right-hand corner. I tell my students who have test anxiety, stick a Post-it note over that so you can't see that countdown, and just rely on yourself to do the best you can to pace through it. You don't need that looming clock reminding you how much time you have. That's only going to serve to increase your level of arousal and make it more likely that you'll make mistakes. Okay, so let's start getting into some theories of motivation. Abraham Maslow, some of you may know him because he developed a hierarchy of needs that's represented in like a pyramid. So a lot of you may have seen it in other classes. I know when I teach industrial and organizational psych, I present it there. It's relevant to a lot of different things, and so you may have come across it before. He actually called it a hierarchy of motives as well, but either way. His basic premise was that humans strive for satisfaction of our basic needs first and foremost. That there are certain things that we're going to try and satisfy first, and then we try to find the motivation to pursue goals that are higher on the hierarchy. The higher the item is on the hierarchy, the less likely it is to be naturally pursued. That, you know, it is only once the lower levels are satisfied that you have the energy to pursue the goals that are higher on the hierarchy. Here's an example. I got this one off the internet because it was prettier than the one that we have in our textbook. Maslow's pyramid of human needs, they labeled it. So we have the physiological at the very bottom, the safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. And actually there are slightly different names for each of these levels. Different people call them kind of different things. Physiological you can look at as anything that is required to keep you alive, right? So breathing, sleep, water, food, exercise, what's that? Something homeostasis. What does that even say? Excretion homeostasis? I don't know. Maintaining homeostasis, having the correct level of food in your body at any given time, having the correct level of water in your body at any time, being well rested. You don't want to be fatigued, but you don't want to be drowsy, you know, all those kinds of things. And then sex is a physiological need also. Once you reach reproductive maturity, it becomes a drive. Okay. The next level is the safety level. And this is the level where you become concerned with your personal security. So, you know, are you healthy at the moment? Are you likely to be assaulted when you go outside? You know, these kinds of things are the main concerns of the safety level. And then, of course, this person who developed this one added on stuff like, you know, security of resources. You know, that one of the things I was just telling my 18-year-old son this story. You know, the more stuff you have, the more you have to be concerned with keeping your stuff, right? So, because I was showing him, you know, he's 18, and we just got a car in the household, which the insurance company default assumes is his. And so I was showing him how much the insurance went up thanks to adding him as as a driver who presumably has his own car. He was a little shocked at how much that costs. And I said, you know, that's the problem. The more stuff we have, the more we have to keep that stuff secure, right? And part of having car insurance is that if he were to get in an accident, it's one thing to be uninsured, but it's another thing that he's under my household and now all my stuff's at risk, right? So it's like once you have stuff, you have to keep your stuff. And this person also put morality in under the safety needs. I'm not sure I would have stuck that there because security of morality kind of implies some bridging over of esteem and belongingness needs too. So I'm not sure I would have put that on this list. But everything else looks pretty decent. Now, love and belonging needs are those needs that we have for feeling like people care about us and that we belong to a group. There's a lot of research that focuses on the human need for group membership. I was just reading one that was talking about treating depression by joining groups. And the key factor in whether joining the group matters or not, whether it helps you to cope with depressive symptoms, is whether you feel committed to the group. So if I, as your psychologist, which by the way I'm not clinical, but if I were your psychologist and you came to me with depression, if I said, hey, I found this really nice group for you to join, here, the meetings are on Tuesdays, that may or may not actually help to alleviate your depressive symptoms. Because if you don't feel invested in the group, it's not going to have the target effect. You have to pick your groups, and then you have to feel like you belong to them, like you feel connected, like part of your identity is coming from those groups. And then that satisfies those love and belonging needs. Feeling like you belong to a family. You know, it doesn't have to be your biological family. It could be people you picked who you now treat as family, whether it's a spouse, or it could be your friends, your other romantic partners, you know, people who you've picked. One of my friends who my kids call Auntie, we picked each other, right? She's obviously not my sister because I don't have a sister, but you know, if we could have picked our sisters, we would have picked each other kind of thing, right? That's what love and belongingness is about. The esteem needs refers to how you feel about yourself and how you think other people feel about you, like as far as respecting you or feeling like you're worthy. So in the esteem needs, we include things like respect of others and respect by others, right? Do you feel like you garner other people's respect, and do you treat other people with respect? Do you have self-confidence? Do you feel like you've been achieving your goals? Stuff like that. So esteem is about how you feel like you stack up and how other people view you and how you view yourself. The self-actualization needs are at the very top, and see how morality is repeated. Most people think morality falls more under self-actualization, like doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Self-actualization also includes creativity, lack of prejudice. Again, see how it builds on something from below, the respect of others. Lack of prejudice is part of that, right? So these factors go into self-actualization. If you want to simplify self-actualization, you would say really achieving your best self, without concern for whether other people are respecting you for who your best self is or not, without concern about whether people will love you or whether you'll still belong to a group or not. You're still doing what you think is right and what you think is representative of you as an individual. Now, according to Maslow, let's see if I put the percentages here. No, I didn't. According to Maslow, for most average Americans, our physiological needs are met like 90% of the time because we have access to food, we have access to water, and things like that. We have healthy air to breathe for the most part. So he says about 90% of the time our physiological needs are met, and about 70% of the time our safety needs are met. An average American has a place to sleep, has some sense of security that, if you leave your house, you're not going to get attacked, things like that. So for most Americans, Maslow says those first two levels are by and large covered. They are by and large met. So he says for most of us, most of our energy is going into the next two levels, love and belonging, and then self-esteem or esteem. That most of us have those needs met at love and belonging. He says maybe 40% of those needs are being met at any given moment, and that esteem needs are being met at probably 30% for most of us. So he says because there's a deficit, it's less than 50% met, that most of us are putting our energy into those two levels, trying to find a romantic partner, trying to feel like we belong in a group of friends, feeling like people respect us and that we are surrounding ourselves with people who deserve our respect, stuff like that. He says very few people spend the majority of their time in self-actualizing behaviors, that most of us are putting our energy into the esteem and love and belonging behaviors. So he thinks are all wishing to become our best selves, but that we're oftentimes bound up in these lower levels and that it prevents us from being able to fully self-actualize. Now, of course, if you look at his list of self-actualized people, you may start to think, oh, well, geez, is anybody going to be able to achieve this goal? Because he's got like Mother Teresa, Gandhi, Abraham Lincoln, people who did what they thought was the right thing to do, even if it put their own security at risk, even if it caused some people not to like them, even if they didn't have a place where they really felt like they belonged all the time. So when you see his list of like people who are putting the majority of their energy into self-actualizing, you start to think, well, gosh, that's a really elite. He says maybe 1% of humans are fully self-actualized. The rest of us are mostly struggling with esteem and love and belonging. And then we take little journeys up into self-actualization, try and be our best selves, but that it's a really tough task to spend most of our time in that level. Okay, so that, like I said, a lot of you may be familiar with that model. And it explains a lot of sort of like what we pursue and what we find interesting and what our goals might be. But let's start getting into some specific motivations like hunger and things like that. So let's go ahead and take a break here, and I'll come back and I'll shift gears into just hunger.